The cities which were formerly great have most of them become insignificant, and such as at present powerful were weak in the olden time. I shall therefore discourse equally of both, convinced that human happiness never remains long in one stay. It would be difficult not to concur with Herodotus, the father of historiography, in this characteristic account of big cities of the past and the present. This is Rome, a city that prevailed in the ancient world and through the Middle Ages, maintaining a significant role in modern times. Legend has it that Romulus and Remus, twin brothers, founded it in 753 BC. They were heirs to Mars, the god of war, and were suckled by a she-wolf, hence the city bears the name of Romulus. Every tourist in Rome admires the vestiges of the eternal city's past. Every visitor may also look at the maps of the Roman Empire. And they may quite naturally wonder whether there is a modern capital in the world today that predates Rome. Perhaps it is Washington, D.C. No way. Maybe Paris, London, Berlin, or Moscow. These are too young to match up to Rome. Then possibly Beijing, Delhi, Tokyo in the east? Negative. It could be that those very maps may help us resolve this matter. Quite a few of the powers on these maps nowadays are nowhere to be found. They failed the onslaught of millennia and were cast off the scene of history. Egypt is still around, and its history is older than that of Rome, but its current capital, Cairo, was only founded in the Middle Ages, the 10th century AD. Iran is standing in for Parthia, although they broke ground for Tehran, its capital city, only in the 9th century AD. Another significant neighbor flanking the Roman Empire on the east is Armenia, and its current capital is Yerevan. Cuneiform inscriptions have survived to our days, attesting to the date of its founding, and this was in 782 BC. 782 before Christ. Apparently, we've found the answer to our query. Rome was founded in 753 BC, whereas Yerevan in 782 BC. That is earlier by 29 years. This is the city hall in Yerevan. Each column on the facade of this remarkable building is dedicated to one of Armenia's prominent former capitals. Through the 5 millennia of its rich history, Armenia has had many capital cities, big and small, of which 12 were most acclaimed. Yerevan is one of these 12, the most recent. The building also houses the Museum of Yerevan History. A large replica of the cuneiform stone birth certificate of the city is set at its entrance. The original inscriptions may be seen at the ancient citadel called Erebuni, and the museum erected at its foot. Rare are the cities in this world that possess written depositions on their founding, birth certificates carved in stone. Yerevan is one of the lucky few. The cuneiform inscriptions spell the city's name as Erebuni. That is because the cuneiform script had no representation for the V sound. It was replaced by a B. The phonetic transformation of the AU pair was pretty common, which is why Yerevan is presented in cuneiform transcription as Erebuni. Erebuni was the principal northern bulwark of the Van or Ararat-Urartu kingdom, which existed between the 9th and 6th centuries BC. There is a reference to it as Ararat in the Holy Bible.
Urartu is certainly the ancient name of the country which today we call Armenia. In the 19th century, when Assyriology was first developing as a science and people were deciphering inscriptions for the first time, there was much excitement when the name Urartu was read for the first time, because people realized that this was the same name as the biblical name of Ararat, which of course had long been known since the time of the Old Testament as the place where the ark in the flood story of Noah and the ark had come to rest.
Ararat, as Armenia is persistently named in the Bible, is mentioned in the scriptures on the occasion of 3 events. The first is the story of the flood and the deliverance of Noah's ark in the mountains of Ararat. The other 2 pertain to the affairs of the 7th and 6th centuries BC, when the Ararat kingdom was one of the formidable states of ancient East, and the city of Erebuni Yerevan was its main stronghold on the north.
Ce qui est très intéressant pour nous à Erebuni, c'est que
What interested us most in Erebuni was the fact that the fortress is the birthplace of Yerevan. This is where Yerevan was founded. Erebuni is truly an impressive archaeological excavation site, especially in the way it preserves the strata pertaining to the Urartian period and the royal Armenian dynasties.
Des niveaux qui appartiennent aux premières dynasties royales arméniennes.
It is remarkable how Argishti I, the founder of the city fortress, states in the inauguratory inscription that it was for the glory of his country and to instill fear among enemies. By the greatness of the god Kaldi, Argishti, son of Menua, built this mighty stronghold and proclaimed it Erebuni for the glory of Biainili and to instill fear among the king's enemies. By the greatness of Kaldi, Argishti, son of Menua, is a mighty king, king of Biainili and ruler of Tushpa. In cuneiform script, the phonetic transformation of the AU pair was common. Hence, in Assyrian and Babylonian cuneiform sources, the Ararat kingdom is often referred to as Urartu. This is the name under which it appears on the world's oldest Babylonian map, where one of the depicted countries is Urartu Ararat, Armenia.
This tablet is the oldest map of the world that has ever been discovered. And it's an archaeological object which is now in the British Museum, which was discovered in the ancient city of Babylon in Iraq in the 19th century. The scribe very carefully wrote on the surface of the map the names of different cities or different tribes or different places which he knew about. So the big cities like Ashur and Babylon and Nippur, the famous sites of ancient Mesopotamia, are there with the little circle with a label inside. Also, up in the northeast, there is a cuneiform inscription which says Urartu. and Urartu is the ancient name that we know today of ancient Armenia.
And this is one of the most renowned inscriptions, almost contemporary with the world's oldest Babylonian map. Achaemenid King Darius I ordered it carved in 6th century BC on a rock in Iran called Bisutun or Behistun. In the Persian section of this trilingual inscription, Armenia is spelled Armina. In the Elamite, it is Harminuya, and in the Babylonian, it is Urartu. All three refer to how the country was named in respective languages. Let us return to the Erebuni archaeological site. Scores of inscriptions were discovered here, recounting the story of founding the fortress, building a shrine there, military barracks, warehouses, and other buildings. The excavations have unearthed and keep on finding there various structures and artifacts which we admire even today in their masterful execution. Several of those objects were commissioned on the occasion of the inauguration of the fortress. Especially impressive among them are shields bearing inscriptions.
Ci troviamo sul territorio della città.
We are within the city walls of Erebuni now, every time in this place, reflecting on these monuments, whether inscriptions or artifacts. We reveal something new, and this is our little contribution to recreating the narrative of civilization.
Il contributo che noi diamo, piccolo contributo, alla ricostruzione della civiltà mondiale.
Erebuni Yerevan excavations began in 1950. Many of the inscriptions found at the site do not refer to an exact date of the fortress's founding. Where has it become known from then? The capital of the Ararat-Urartu kingdom was the city of Tushpa, subsequently Van, which is why the kingdom is often referred to in literature as the Van Kingdom. Well-preserved cuneiform inscriptions have survived on the rock-carved walls of the Tushpa Van citadel. The largest among them, containing also the longest history of the kingdom of Van, recounts year by year the deeds of Argishti I, the most powerful ruler of Ararat-Urartu. The inscription reveals that King Argishti founded the fortress of Erebuni during the 5th year of his reign, which makes it 782 BC, 29 years before the founding of Rome. Erebuni, though, is not the earliest frontier in the history of Yerevan. Traces of human habitation in Yerevan date back to the early Stone Age. Remnants of a skull discovered in one of Yerevan's Stone Age caves made it possible to reconstruct the face of this 40,000-year-old cave dweller. Shengavit, one of the better-known ancient settlements, is on the shore of the Yerevan Lake. It used to be a preeminent center of the early Bronze Age in the Armenian highland, which is why a number of scholars have named its Milia de Shengavit culture. The Shengavit or early Bronze Age culture lasted about a millennium, from the middle of the 4th to the middle of the 3rd millennia BC, spanning the entire Armenian highland. between the 28th and 26th centuries BC. It spread onto the neighboring countries, onto the northern Caucasus, extending in the south all the way to Egypt and the central regions of Iran. In fact, about 5,500 years ago, Yerevan through Shengavit became the center of the Armenian highland, maintaining this position for almost a millennium. Interestingly, 4,000 years down the road, it once again became the center of the Armenian world and has been playing this role for 500 years now. There is a certain mysticism in this. As the Bible goes, everything returneth again according to his circuits. The depth of Yerevan's history is evident in a piece of lore regarding its naming, which pertains to the flood and patriarch Noah. According to this legend, after the Ark of Salvation embarked atop Mount Ararat, Noah spotted some dry land and exclaimed, "Yervat, it is visible." And since what became visible is where Yerevan is situated, the place was named Yerevan, which means visible in Armenian. Many cities in this world have a legend associated with their naming, like Rome does. The legend of the founding of Athens dates farther back to semi-mythical Theseus in the 13th century BC. Here again, Yerevan has a clear advantage. According to lore, it was founded by Patriarch Noah, the progenitor of modern mankind, whereas the already purely historical evidence carved in stone dates it at year 782 BC. As an inhabited settlement, Yerevan has had uninterrupted existence from the date of its founding to our days. Within the city perimeter, in the immediate vicinity of Shengavit, is the fortress of Teishebaini in the ancient settlement of Karmir Blur, also founded during the Ararat-Urartu kingdom about 100 years after Erebuni. This astounding city fortress became yet another northern bulwark of the kingdom. Even after the Ararat-Urartu kingdom, life within the territory of Yerevan was quite vibrant. The palatial complex built in the Erebuni-Yerevan outpost in the Achaemeni period comes to prove it, as do the discoveries of hoards of coins of Alexander the Great, Seleucid, and Parthian kings and Roman emperors. The place also thrived during the early Middle Ages, when Armenia became the first to adopt Christianity as an official religion of the state in 301 AD. This was attested to by the St. Peter and Paul Church, built here in the 5th century and subsequently pulled down by atheist Soviets, as well as by the Avan Cathedral, built in 590, now dilapidated. There exist many testimonials on Yerevan in the works of medieval historians, where the city is referred to as Erevan, Arevan, Irevan, Iravan, and other variations. Most noteworthy among these is the passage in the chronicle of the 7th century historian Sebius on the Arab invasion of Armenia in 642 to 643. The invaders lay siege on Yerevan, fought extended battles under its fortified walls, all to no avail. Yerevan flourished during the Armenian kingdoms and principalities of the 9th to 13th centuries. New spiritual and cultural centers were founded. Manuscripts were written and copied. It is characteristic that Yerevan with its environs won acclaim for its famous gardens, referred to in numerous records. In the middle of the 13th century, the Mongol Tartars conquered Armenia. Substantial population was massacred or driven into captivity. A massive exodus of Armenians began. The Mongol-Tartar invasion was followed by another calamity. In 1387, the hordes of Tamerlane besieged Yerevan. Around the middle of the 15th century, under the rule of Turkoman Karakoyunlu, who came from the east, the Ararat province was established, with its center in Yerevan. From that period onwards, Yerevan was referred to as the capital of the Ararat land. The Turco-Persian wars throughout the 16th to 17th centuries mostly fought over the territories of Armenia and Mesopotamia, brought about a disastrous situation for the entire Armenian nation. Yerevan became a priority target for foreign conquerors. Suffice it to mention just one episode. In 1604, the Persian Shah Abbas forcefully relocated 300 Armenians from eastern Armenia to Persia, and these included many from the city of Yerevan. Armenia was eventually divided between Ottoman Turkey and Persia, and the dividing line remained intact until the early 19th century. Eastern Armenia was handed to Persia, while Turkey occupied Western Armenia. A substantial part of Eastern Armenia comprised the Khanate of Yerevan. The Khanate also included the spiritual center of the Armenian Apostolic Church, the Holy Ejmiadzin. The plight of the Christian nation was aggravated by being split between two Muslim superpowers. The unbearable conditions impeded with the advancement of culture, socio-economic development. An example to illustrate. Armenian printing originated in Venice in 1512, followed by dozens of Armenian print shops sprouting throughout the countries, with even the smallest Armenian communities in them. Nevertheless, the Armenians accomplished setting up the first one in their own land, only 260 years after the invention of print, in 1771 through the efforts of Catholicos Simon Yerevanci. This is the throne of the famous Catholicos, who was born in Yerevan, now on display at the National History Museum of Armenia. The last Armenia kingdom had dwindled in the 15th century. Many prominent sons of the Armenian nation subscribed to the quest for the liberation of Armenia in the course of the 15th to 19th centuries. They were attempting to secure the assistance of the Christian powers in freeing their nation. Initially, Armenians mostly approached Western European monarchs, often seeking the backing of the Pope to liberate the country of biblical Mount Ararat, the safe haven to Noah's Ark. From the beginning of the 18th century, Armenian activists also approached the Christian power gaining strength in North Russia, which, beginning with Peter the Great, was actively seeking expansion to the south. Together with the Russian court, the Armenian figures were drawing plans for the liberation of their country, which yielded results in the first 30 years of the 19th century, when most of eastern Armenia was ceded to the Russian Empire. The new Russo-Persian War of 1826 to 1828 brought victory to the Russians. Its breaking point was the taking of the fortress of Yerevan on October 1st, 1827. The Russian troops had failed in two previous attempts, in 1804 and 1808. Under the Treaty of Turkmenchay, concluded on February 10, 1828, the Khanates of Yerevan and Nakhichevan, as well as the Ordubad region, were ceded to Russia. These territories were consolidated into the Armenian province, an administrative unit in the Russian Empire. The title of the Russian emperor was augmented with the Lord and King of the Armenian province.
Благодарный армянский народ
The grateful Armenian people cherished the memory of the historical events of the liberation struggle and the role in it of Russia and the Russian people. We remember the unprecedented heroism of General Krasovsky's unit in saving St. Ezhmiastin. The memorial to the heroes in Oshakhan is living proof of this. Eastern Armenia was liberated in 1828 with the signing of the Turkmenchai Treaty. Already in 1834, a magnificent memorial to honor the heroes was erected in Oshakhan. The remains of 1,132 Russian soldiers were put to rest underneath it. They had selflessly thrown themselves against the overwhelming forces of the Persian army. A special medal was minted for the taking of Yerevan, awarded to many servicemen. During the war, Armenian volunteer regiments distinguished themselves with heroism. They fought alongside Russian troops under their own banners, winning admiration and awards from the Russian command. Yerevan remained the administrative center of the Armenian province between 1828 to 1840. This is the coat of arms of the Armenian province. Under the aegis of the two-headed Imperial Russian eagle, Armenia is represented by three symbols. The first is Mount Ararat, with the ark on the summit. The second is the crown of the foremost Armenian king, Tigran the Great. And the third is the cathedral in Ezhmiastin, the spiritual center of Christian Armenia. After ascension to the Russian Empire, Yerevan underwent significant changes. Certain sectors of the economy developed exponentially. This was especially true with respect to the production of cognac. Yerevan's role as the center of national culture became even more prominent. Countless books and periodicals were published in Armenian and foreign languages. Many new schools, theaters, cultural establishments spawned. During the years of the First World War, taking advantage of the global chaos, Turkey perpetrated the first genocide of the 20th century in Western Armenia. Hundreds of thousands of its survivors, Armenian exiles, found refuge in eastern Armenia. Yerevan too became a haven for huge numbers of refugees. In 1917, the two Russian revolutions toppled the Russian Empire. In January of 1918, Turkish troops invaded Transcaucasia. The situation was disastrous. The enemy exceeded Armenians in numbers and armament. But the Armenians consolidated around Yerevan, and in May of 1918, through a series of decisive and heroic battles, contained the onslaught. On May 28, 1918, the independence of Armenia that had declined in the 14th century was regained. Yerevan was proclaimed the capital of the Republic of Armenia. This is the old history of Yerevan, chronicled through millennia to our days. One may be envious of such an ancient history, kind-heartedly, of course. But there are also exits spiteful envy, to which succumb those who are deprived of their own values. This is the feeling prevailing among those who look at Yerevan across Armenia's eastern border, attempting to twist true history. At the end of May 1928, the Caucasian Tatars, or Caucasian Turks, inhabiting the eastern regions of Transcaucasia proclaimed a state, naming it Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is the phonetically transformed name of Atropatene.
Atropatene is first mentioned by classical authors, such as Strabo, Pliny the Elder, Ptolemy, for example, amongst others, and a number of other classical sources. What's very consistent is that Atropatene is basically defined as that region that is south of the Araxes River, what is now modern-day Azerbaijan and Iran. There is no such thing as an entity known as Azerbaijan north of the Araxes River, north of the province of Iranian Azerbaijan. Historically, no such entity has ever existed, and as we'll see later, it only began in late May of 1918 when such an entity was created, mostly in a political aspect.
Yerevan celebrated its 2,750th anniversary in 1968, setting off a tradition. Every year in the month of October, Armenians celebrate the day of their capital. With an aspiration to falsify the history of Yerevan, an event was organized in Baku in 2011, in which the president of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, participated himself. It was called the 500 Years of the Fortress of Yerevan. Azerbaijanis allege that Yerevan was founded in the beginning of the 16th century by Revan Guli Khan, from whom the city's name therefore originated. One has to be half-witted to make such a claim, since Yerevan and its fortress have been mentioned dozens of times before the advent of the 16th century. As early as in the 7th century, Yerevan withstood the Arabs, remaining impregnable. In 1387, it fought Tamerlane when 500 of its citizens fell. Then again, how could it possibly be founded in the early 16th century and be named after Revan Guli Khan when 2 centuries before that, in the first half of the 14th century, Mongol rulers Abu Sa'id and Anushirvan had minted coins in the city of Yerevan with its name on them? Falsification as Azerbaijani public policy does not limit itself with forging the history of the capital Yerevan. It extends over all of Armenia and its people. As early as in 1990s, the preceding president of Azerbaijan, Heydar Aliyev, the progenitor of incumbent Ilham Aliyev, instructed Azerbaijani historians to falsify and restate the history of the region to the benefit of Azerbaijan. Already during the Soviet period, there existed a good school in Azerbaijan, but unfortunately, it is now mostly suppressed. Those who at least say something, who dare to speak up, get persecuted by people who are appointed through political motivation and are rather detached from science. As a result of public policy intent on fabrication, not only Armenian lands and cultural monuments were proclaimed Azerbaijani, but also the history and culture of other nations. For example, the Safavid kingdom of Persia was pronounced an Azerbaijani state, while the world-famous medieval Persian poet Nizami an Azerbaijani Turk. As for Nizami, we recently learned that the Persian poems inscribed on his tombstone have been erased. Nizami himself, when once requested to recite a poem in Turkish, responded with the following 2 beats: "A Turk's conduct does not befit us. Turkish speak is not our value. He who is noble shall speak a noble tongue. That is, I am Persian and shall speak in Persian. It belittles me to use the savage language of the Turk." One of the important pillars of Azerbaijani falsification is the statement that Armenians did not inhabit the territory of the current Republic of Armenia before the 15th century. In order to comprehend the absurdity of this, one only needs to cast a glance at the prominent maps of the world, drawn and published, incidentally, by non-Armenians.
Հերոդոտոսը իր աշխատանքների մեջ նշում է Հայաստանը, նշում է նրա գտնված վայրը Տիգրիսի եւ Եփրատի գետերի շրջապատում ներսում դրանցից հյուսիս գտնված տարածքը.
Herodotus, the father of historiography, refers in his works to Armenia and its location, the headwaters of Tigris and Euphrates, the territory north of it, while German and English cartographers, who drew maps of the world according to his data, placed Armenia almost in the center of the world. Eratosthenes, living in the 3rd century BC, his works also contain references to Armenia and maps drawn on the basis of his writings, as well as those of other antique scholars, always place Armenia in the center.
Ինչպես նաև մյուս հայտնի հույն աշխարհագրագետների, մասնագետների պատրաստած գրած գրությունների հիման վրա պատրաստված քարտեզները, բոլորը կենտրոնում ունեն Հայաստանը.
This list could go on indefinitely. Browsing through maps by famous antique and medieval authors, Strabo Ptolemy, 10th century Arab geographer Al-Istarkhi. Armenia throughout is placed between the Black, Caspian, and Mediterranean seas. The Turco-Persian Wars, those were raging since early 16th century, devastated Armenia and reduced its population. Leaping at this opportunity, the Azerbaijani fabricators of history attempted to claim that no Armenians lived in this region on the 17th century. The ludicrousness of this claim is made apparent by a neutral source of the period, the famous French traveler Jean Jardin. Passing through Yerevan in 1673, which was then under Persian rule, he made a drawing of the city, entitling it the German publication of his travel memoirs. Yerevan, the capital of Armenia, mind you, of no other country. The mosques of Yerevan are a favorite subject of Azerbaijani counterfeiters. According to various sources in the 19th century, there were 2 large mosques within the perimeter of the Yerevan fortress and 6 smaller ones nearby. Today, one of the larger mosques is preserved in Yerevan, the Blue Mosque. The rest were brought down during the years of Soviet power. It is common knowledge that the Soviet authorities, with atheism as their banner, for many decades demolished the houses of prayer throughout the territory of the USSR. Numerous Christian Armenian monuments were pulled down in Yerevan through those years. The St. Peter and Paul Church, built in the 5th century, was ruined in the 1930s. The magnificent St. Mary's Cathedral of the 12th and 13th centuries was destroyed in the center of Yerevan. The churches of St. Gregory the Illuminator, St. Simon, Thessaloniki, Malar, the medieval cemetery of Kozern, Gethsemane, and many other structures of historical value were demolished. In 1938, notwithstanding the numerous protests and complaints, the authorities pulled down the surviving fragments of the walls of the fortress of Yerevan, building a wine factory instead. The Russian Nikolaev Church, a majestic 19th century architectural monument, was also destroyed. And the 1913 St. Mary's Russian Orthodox Church in the 1930s was converted to a movie theater. This was the reality of those years. One cannot help but recall and remind Azerbaijani authorities of a well-known quote by Abraham Lincoln. You can fool all the people some of the time, and some of the people all the time, but you cannot fool all the people all the time. The restoration of Armenian statehood in 1918 opened a new page in the history of Yerevan. It was officially proclaimed the capital city of the Republic of Armenia. The presence of tens of thousands of refugees, the famine and outbreaks of disease notwithstanding, the new state managed to get on its feet. After many centuries of foreign rule, Armenian universities, cultural and academic centers reopened. In accordance with the Paris Peace Conference, the Treaty of Sèvres and the U.S. President Woodrow Wilson Arbitration Award of 1919 to 1920, the Republic of Armenia should have consolidated 4 out of 7 provinces of Western Armenia. Yerevan was to become the capital of United Armenia. This was something that never took shape. Kemalist Turkey, in alliance with Bolshevik Russia, waged war against Armenia in September of 1920. On December 2, 1920, Armenia was conquered and split between those 2 countries. Most of the territory of the Republic of Armenia was joined to the Soviet state. Karabakh and Nakhchivan were severed from that territory and handed over to Azerbaijan, and on the remaining 30,000 or so square kilometers extended the power of Soviet Armenia. The Armenian Soviet Socialist Republic was a semi-independent state within the USSR, and Yerevan was once again its capital city. The occupation and alienation of Armenia's territories throughout the 1920s to the 1930s, the destruction of numerous monuments of Armenian culture and faith, the exile of progressive intellectuals had an extremely detrimental effect on the country and its capital city. Nevertheless, thanks to the creative potency of the Armenian nation and the conditions of peace, the war-ravaged country was soon rebuilt. Led by the talented architect Alexander Tamanian, the city's development under a uniform plan began in 1924. The plan devoted particular attention to the preservation of historical and cultural monuments, something that the authorities failed to observe. The construction of the city's main square began in 1926. The State History Museum of Armenia is on its northern side. This was followed by the construction of the State Opera and Ballet Theater and the first Armenian Astronomical Observatory, which later became the basis for the world-renowned Burakan Observatory. In 1941 to 1945, the USSR was drawn into the Second World War. In the years of war, 600,000 Armenians enlisted in the Soviet Army. Every second, one of them did not return from the front line. During those years, the 89th, 408th, and 261st Armenian Infantry Divisions were formed in Yerevan. The first made it all the way to Berlin, the second to Czechoslovakia, and the third was deployed to the Armenian-Turkish border, since Turkey had entered an alliance with fascist Germany and was waiting for the fall of Stalingrad to invade Transcaucasia. During the year of war and the post-war period, 170 Armenians became generals, 4 became army marshals, and 1 an admiral of the Navy. More than 70,000 Armenians were decorated with orders and medals. Following the end of Stalinist tyranny in the middle of the 1950s, the peoples of the USSR acquired certain possibilities to develop their respective cultures. Matenadaran, the world's biggest depository of Armenian manuscripts, was built during the 1950s. Today, it preserves about 18,000 manuscripts and more than 100,000 archival documents, not only in the Armenian language, but in the classic Greek, Assyrian, Latin Arabic, Georgian, and other languages. Since 1957, the statue of Mother Armenia stands vigil over the capital in the Victory Park. Not far from it, a 50-meter-high stele of Victory was erected in 1967, crowned by a symbolic turret of an Ararat Urartu kingdom fortress and the Tree of Life, a symbol of eternal life. In 1959, another symbolic monument was erected in Yerevan, the statue of David of Sassoon, the main epic hero of Armenia, an unrelenting fighter for justice. 1965 marked the 50th anniversary of the Armenian genocide perpetrated by the Turks. The construction of the Sisir Ernakaberd Memorial to the victims of the genocide commenced and was completed in 1967. Dynamic construction in the city continued through the subsequent decades. The Yerevan Underground was commissioned. The sports and concert complex, a major cultural venue of the Republic, many others. In 1988, the first national liberation movement in the USSR began. The Armenian people rose up with the fair demand to reunite Karabakh with the motherland. Thus began the story of the collapse of the USSR. Armenia regained its independence in 1991. And Yerevan once again became the capital city of independent Armenia. This ancient city is now one of the flourishing and young metropolises of the world. An ancient legend associates the naming of the city with the flood and with Patriarch Noah, while cuneiform inscriptions that have survived to our days prove that Yerevan was founded in the year 782 BC, 29 years before Rome.